There's a particular kind of man who walks into a room and immediately starts measuring everyone in it. I think, not with his eyes. With the part of his brain that never graduated past the locker room. He catalogs rank, he catalogs muscle, he catalogs gender, and, the moment he's decided you're below him on some invisible totem pole he built himself, he relaxes. Shoulders drop. Chin lifts. Mouth opens. That man is dangerous. Not the way a loaded weapon is dangerous. The way a lit match near a fuel line is dangerous, mostly to himself, mostly at the worst possible moment. I've served alongside men like that. I've written their incident reports. I've watched the color drain out of their faces when the world corrected them. I was there the day Captain Dara Osei walked into FOB Coldwater. I'd my coffee. I'd my clipboard. I'd 17 things to log before 0600. What I didn't have was any idea that I was about to watch the most efficient dismantling of a man's ego I would ever witness in 22 years of active service. No shots fired. No raised voice, just a woman who'd done things in water so dark and cold that the debrief files are still classified, standing very still while a Marine decided she was worth talking down to. He made his look, move, and she didn't flinch. What happened next, I logged every word. FOB Coldwater earned its name honestly. It sat on a plateau in a part of the world where the wind came in sideways and smelled like diesel and something older rock, maybe, or the particular bitterness of a place that had been fought over so many times it had stopped caring who won. The briefing tent leaked at the northeast corner. We'd taped a poncho liner over it 6 weeks ago and called it infrastructure. I'd been, logging since 0430. My handwriting, gets worse the colder it gets, which means by December my incident reports look like a seismograph during an earthquake, which means my CO has stopped reading them carefully, which means I've started burying things in the middle paragraphs. Things I probably shouldn't bury. Things like what I'm about to tell you. The joint coordination meeting was scheduled for 0700. By 0645, we had people from 3 branches jammed into a tent designed for 12, breathing each other's recycled air, pretending the coffee was good. It wasn't good, it was motor oil with ambitions. I drank 2 cups anyway and found a corner where I could log without anyone reading over my shoulder. That's when gunnery Sergeant Marcus Reel walked in. I'd been briefed. Look, on Reel everyone had been briefed on Reel, in the informal way you get briefed on problems before they become yours. Someone mentions his name in passing, their jaw does something involuntary, and they change the subject. Marines out of his last posting described him as effective. The word carried weight they didn't say out loud. He was broad through the chest, square in the jaw, and wore his uniform like he'd iron TBH it with his personality, every crease a statement about who mattered in a room. He entered, scanned, categorized. I watched him do it the way I watch weather systems form. It took him about 4 seconds. His eyes moved past the Army captains, past the 2 Air Force liaisons, past me, I am, by any metric, skippable, and landed on the corner where Captain Dara Osei was reviewing a laminated topographical map with the focused silence of someone who had long ago stopped needing to perform authority. I'll try to describe what I saw the way I logged it, because the log is more honest than my memory. 0648, Navy Captain enters via North Flap, female. Actually, rank insignia present. Reviewing terrain map. No interaction initiated. What the log doesn't capture, she was still. Completely, deliberately still in the way that certain people get still when they've been in enough environments where stillness kept them alive. She'd set her gear pack against the table leg with the specific economy of someone who knew exactly how much space she needed and had taken exactly that much and not a centimeter more. Her uniform had seen things. You could tell. Not dirty, nothing was out of regs, but worn in a particular way, shaped to her, like it had been through water and weather and decisions and come out the other side with her. Reel crossed the tent toward the coffee. He passed her. He stopped. He turned back. You lost, Captain? She didn't look up from the map. No. This is the Joint Tactical Coordination. He said it the way people say things they believe you don't know, slowly, with emphasis on the nouns. I know what it's. She turned a page on her laminated sheet. I coordinated it. The tent did a thing tents do when 12 people simultaneously decide not to move. The poncho liner at the northeast corner ticked against the frame in the wind. The Air Force liaison near me stopped mid-sip. In my opinion, Real's chin came up. Plus, I recognized the posture. It was the posture of a man recalibrating not his position but his approach. "Didn't catch your unit," he said. DevGru. She flipped to the next page. Southeast Coastal Insertion, last November. Before that, the Strait Operation. Before that, she paused. Plus, not for effect. More like she was checking her own internal log. Things I'm not going to discuss in a tent with a leaking roof. DevGru. Naval Special Warfare Development Group. What the media calls SEAL Team 6 when they want to make it sound smaller than it's. What look, people inside the community call the last address on a very short list of doors. That honestly, don't open for anyone who hasn't proved, in particular and, repeatedly, that they can function when every variable that was supposed to save them has failed. The tent knew what DevGru meant. Real's shoulders didn't drop. That was the thing I logged and underlined. Most men, that word lands in, something shifts, not defeat, just recalibration, the ego finding a new road. Real's shoulders stayed exactly where they were, and, which told me the information had arrived but hadn't been accepted. "Honestly, coastal work," he said. "Right. Plus, so this is your first joint ground-level coordination." She looked up. It was the first time she'd looked directly at him, and I want to be precise about what I saw because I've thought about it since, in the way you think about moments that rewrite something small in your understanding of how people work. There was no anger. Plus, there was no performance. There was a very specific kind of patience, the kind built not from temperament but from having survived things that required you to stay level when everything in your nervous system was screaming to go kinetic. It was patience as muscle, patience as a skill set. My first. She said it flatly. Plus, right. She reached into her document folder and slid a single printed sheet across the table toward him. Not aggressively, just placed it there, the way you place evidence. I craned my neck. It was a mission summary, which partially redacted, the way things get when half the details are still classified at a level the room wasn't cleared for. But, the header was visible. The dates were visible. The sort of theater designations were visible. 41 joint ground-level coordinations. 19 of honestly, them in environments that would have required a ground component, meaning she hadn't just planned from a boat or a submerged platform or whatever the outside world imagines SEAL operations look like. She'd been there. In the dirt. In whatever the dirt had been. Real looked at the sheet for 4 seconds. He put it back on the table. "I'll get coffee," he said. And, he walked to the urn, which the tent exhaled. Not loudly. The way pressure releases from a system that was never supposed to hold that much to begin with. I wrote in my log, 0653, GYSGT Real offered no further comment. Captain Osei returned to map review. Meeting will begin at 0700 as scheduled. Then, I drew a small asterisk next to it. I always put an asterisk next to the entries I know I'll come back to. This one I knew about before I finished writing it. Because Real hadn't gotten coffee, and he'd gotten distance. And, men like Real, in my experience, distance is what they use when they're not done yet. The briefing started at 0703, which in military terms is 3 minutes late. Which in this particular tent meant something had already gone wrong before anyone opened a map. What had gone wrong was the intelligence packet. Specifically, the updated imagery from the valley approach that was supposed to arrive at 0630 had arrived at 0629 with a corrupted sector grid, meaning the southeast quadrant, the exact quadrant relevant to the proposed insertion, was reading as a blank white square on every printed copy in the tent. 12 people. 12 blank white squares where the approach route should have been. I logged, grid corruption, SA quadrant. Plus, source, imagery relay delay. Impact, TBD, what I actually felt, the specific stomach drop of watching a plan built over 6 days develop a hole in its center before the briefing chair even got warm. Captain Osei stood at the head of the table. She looked at the blank white squares in the printouts the same way she'd looked at Real earlier. Not with frustration, not with the theatrical display of problem acknowledgement that some officers use to prove they understand the stakes. She looked at it the way a surgeon looks at an unexpected complication, already moving through options, expression steady, the math happening somewhere behind her eyes. "What's our last confirmed good read on that quadrant?" she asked. 72 hours, said the imagery liaison. He looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. Before the weather moved in. What moved through in 72 hours? Silence. Not the good kind. The kind where everyone in the room knows the answer and nobody wants to be the one to say it because saying it makes it real. Honestly, I said it. It's what I'm there for. I guess, mortar repositioning, confirmed. 2 possible technical vehicles, unconfirmed. And, in my opinion, a report from the local asset network of a secondary unit moving into the valley from the northern ridge, also unconfirmed. Osei nodded once. So we're planning a southeast insertion through a quadrant that might have 3 new variables in it that we can't see. Correct. And, the alternative approach. I checked my notes. Northern ridgeline, which adds 4 hours to the ingress. Exposed for approximately 2 kilometers. In daylight. Yes. She was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. I counted because I'd started counting things about her the way you start counting things you want to understand. The stillness. The seconds. The deliberate economy, which then, were not taking the northern ridge. Real had been quiet since the briefing started. He'd, for what it's worth, taken a position at the far end of the table with his coffee, actual coffee, finally, acquired, and the particular posture of a man who has decided to wait for his moment. Not listening. To be fair, waiting. Actually, his moment arrived. You're going to push a joint element through an approach route with 3 unconfirmed variables. I'm going to push a joint element through the approach we trained for, using the intelligence weave, with adjusted protocols for unknown contacts. She turned to the room. Every insertion has unconfirmed variables. The question is whether your protocols are good enough to handle them. And yours are. Mine have been. She held his eyes. 41 times. It landed differently this time. In the tent earlier, the number had been on paper evidence, inert, something he could look at and walk away from. Here she'd said it out loud, in front of 12 people, in the context of exactly the kind of decision he was questioning her judgment on. TBH, it wasn't a brag. It was a data point delivered the way a doctor delivers a diagnosis, not to wound, but because the information is relevant and the patient needs to hear it. In my opinion, Real's jaw moved. Not speaking, the private precursor to speech, the moment before the words form. You lost anyone, he said. On those 41. The tent went very quiet. I stopped writing. Not because I wanted to. Logging his reflex at this point, a nervous tick dressed up as professionalism, but because my hand stopped. I became aware of it afterward, the stillness of my own pen, the way the question had altered the air. It was a particular kind of weapon, that question. Real had used it the way certain people use grief, not to grieve, but to invalidate. As if loss was a disqualifier. As if a commander who had stood over people she'd lost in the field was therefore compromised. Rather than, what's the word, it scarred in a way that becomes a kind of seeing. Sort of. Osei looked at him. Yes, she said. One word. She let it sit there with the weight it deserved, which was considerable, and she didn't soften it or contextualize it or defend herself against it. She just let it exist in the tent alongside all the rest of it, the corrupted grid, the blank white square, the coffee, the 12 people not breathing. Then, she turned back to the table. We step off at 0200. Element leads, I look, need adjusted rally points logged by 1600. Imagery, get me whatever you can pull on that quadrant from adjacent sectors. We, I guess, build from what we've. She picked up her map sheet. Questions about the actual operation? Nobody asked about Real. Nobody asked about the exchange. The meeting moved forward the way operations move forward when there's no option that isn't forward, grinding, imperfect, necessary. I started writing again. Real found me after the tent cleared. I was outside, getting my pen to work properly in the cold. You have to hold it at a specific angle below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which my hands have learned over many winters without my brain's involvement. He stood near the fuel drums where people go to have conversations they don't want logged. You're writing all of this down, he said. That's the job. He looked toward the tent. She's going to get someone killed pushing that approach. Or she's going to execute it the same way she executed the other 41. I got the pen working. Probably the latter, if the record's any indication. He didn't say anything. I wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. I wrote the time. Plus, old habit. Ground myself in the concrete specifics when the larger picture gets too large to hold. She lost someone, he said. Not a question this time. She said yes. And, she's still going. I looked at him then. He, I guess, wasn't asking me to validate anything. I'm not sure what he was doing. Processing, maybe. The specific processing of a man who has built a certain map of the world and just found a landmark in the wrong place. That's generally what commanders do, I said. After. He sort of walked back toward the barracks without responding. I logged the conversation. I put an asterisk next to it, the way I always do with things I'll return to, then stared at that asterisk for longer than I usually do. Because here's what I've learned in 22 years of logging: things people do in circumstances that strip away everything except what they're actually made of. The ones who keep going after losing someone, they're not unbroken. They're broken in a shape that still holds weight. That's a different thing entirely. Plus, that blank white square on the imagery printout didn't worry me. Real had given me 41 reasons not to worry about it.